Welcome back to yet another night shift. It's shift number 4, and in a fit of narcissistic delirium, I decided to search for one of my own publications. But I can't actually see it without paying. The per article price is pretty standard, £30 or $40. If you're writing a paper, you might reference 50 studies, which would be a huge expense. Luckily, I get access through my university, who are in turn funded by me and other students through our fees and by the government. An establishment like UCL will pay something like £10 to £12 million a year for subscription to scientific journals, most of which belong to just 5 publishing companies. Okay, we're all used to paywalls these days, but for the price of access to just my one article, I can get a year of access to The Times and The Economist, or 2-year subscription to Nebula and CuriosityStream with the code MEDLIFE. And The Times or The Economist pays their journalists, either per article or with a salary. But scientific journals don't produce their own material, scientists do, and they're not paid by the journal, they're paid by us, the taxpayer, in most cases. Then journals have people vetting submissions, the peer review process, but peer reviewers aren't paid either. They're other scientists giving up their time for free. Any working scientist has been involved in peer review on the expectation that others will do the same for you when you submit something. Now that in itself has problems. A peer reviewer could be a clueless YouTubing doctor who's half-arsing his review. I'm joking, I do take it seriously when I do it. Or an experienced professor who spends a great deal of time analysing the data and checking all the statistics. To the author, we just come through as reviewer 1 and reviewer 2. I've had this experience. One reviewer tore me to shreds, said the article was rubbish, asked if I was even a native English speaker, and the other reviewer's entire comment was, "Seems fine." But the multiple problems with science publishing, like peer review and bias towards novel and positive research, is a tangent for another day. So, science journals don't pay their authors, they don't pay their reviewers, the public pays for the content, the science itself, in the form of tax, and then the public then pays millions to access that science. So you as a taxpayer are paying twice to benefit from any of this science. Is it just me? Or is that the biggest scam since Charles Ponzi said, "It's not a pyramid scheme, it's a trapezoid scheme"? Incredibly, the scientific publishing industry is valued at around $20 billion, somewhere around the music and movie industries, despite being far smaller, as it's so profitable. The biggest publisher, Elsevier, had a 2018 profit margin of 38%, placing it way above all the big tech companies, and it's been consistently at around that level for years. Poor, impoverished companies like Apple, Amazon, and Google can only dream of figures like that. Let me ask you a question. Should knowledge be free? Should we have to pay to be educated? Now, don't think about an academic in an ivory tower. Think about a regular person, unsupported by a university, who wants to learn more about a certain field. Maybe their child was born with a rare disease. Maybe they want to really understand the science of climate change instead of reading the media. It's all well and good internet smartasses like me say, please do your own research, but if the average citizen can't afford to, they will instead find misinformation, which, as we all know, is freely available. I want to highlight 2 people in this story, 2 people that have shaped the whole landscape more than anyone else. People outside Britain might not have heard of Robert Maxwell, but you've certainly heard of his daughter. The widow of convicted sex offender and dubiously suicided Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell is the daughter of Britain's most notorious media tycoon, Robert Maxwell, fraudster, alleged spy, and one of the inspirations for Logan Roy's character in Succession. If you go back a few decades, the idea of making money out of scientific work was absurd. Of course, businessmen used scientific ideas throughout the Industrial Revolution, and people could patent use of their ideas, but knowledge itself was shared freely, particularly amongst scientists, until Maxwell realized he could turn science into profit and created a company called Pergamon Press. Stephen Baragni colourfully illustrates Maxwell's rise to power and influence in his excellent article that I'm linking below, but essentially Maxwell wowed scientists with flash hotels, glamorous parties, and cold hard cash. Then signed them up to exclusive deals with his journals. We would get dinner and fine wine, and at the end he would present us with a cheque, a few £1,000s for the society. It was more money than us poor scientists had ever seen. I didn't realize until researching this video how enormous his influence on modern science has been. The whole system has been shaped by his model. The paid subscriptions, the journalistic way controversy and novelty are prioritized, the dominance of a handful of journals, and the way scientists dream of being published in those high-profile periodicals. Long, meandering pursuits of the big questions in science, or attempts to recreate the work of others, replication studies, have been replaced by quickly turned around experiments in whatever flavour is hot with journal editors at the time. This year, of course, if you're not publishing COVID research, who the hell even are you? Oh, what's that? Your unblinded observational study of vitamin D and COVID is going to change the world. Oh, and you don't even have a control group? Even better, call the Nobel Prize Committee. We got a game changer right here. And while I made a comparison to print journalism earlier on, there's a big difference. You don't need a subscription to The Atlantic or Time magazine to live your life. But scientists working in a field have got no choice. They can't decide they're not going to read research published in their area, or they won't be able to work. This is a true monopoly. Maxwell's eventful life prematurely came to an end some years later, but prior to that he sold Pergamon Press to Elsevier, making it the biggest scientific publisher by a long way, and soon Elsevier started sharply hiking up the prices to their 1,000 titles. University libraries were for the first time forced to stop subscribing to the less popular titles. So if you worked in a niche field, you might find yourself unable to access the very science you're pursuing. By the mid-90s, Forbes magazine asked if the immensely profitable scientific publishing industry would be killed off by the new hotness in town, the internet, which offered to spread knowledge around the world for free. But Elsevier, now in control of about a quarter of all scientific literature, told universities to pay a lump sum for their entire catalogue or get nothing. That figure has been steadily climbing ever since. I don't want to single out Elsevier here. There are a few other companies that collectively exert a stranglehold on scientific publishing, but Elsevier do help us segue into the second person I want to highlight, because they are being sued by Elsevier for $15 million. I've described Alexandra Elbakyan as having done more for science than any other living person, and I stand by that. If you don't recognize her name, you might know her website, Sci-Hub, a server dedicated to offering almost all scientific articles for free, which is, of course, illegal. But illegal isn't always wrong. It is now home to almost 80 million scientific papers. I caught up with Alexandra via Zoom, all the way from her home in Kazakhstan. Why did you create Sci-Hub? What were you trying to do?
Ну, я создала этот сайт, чтобы любой человек мог на него зайти и получить бесплатный доступ к научной статье. Чтобы запустить самую первую версию Sci-Hub, рабочую, ну, в общем, ее запуск занял 3 дня. Ну, создание, запуск, да, вот так.
Does it occupy a lot of your time now, or is it kind of not such a big commitment at the moment?
Ну, тут надо смотреть, я же занимаюсь как бы не только технической частью, но и продвижением. То есть надо там, например, на те же интервью отвечать. Это тоже занимает много времени сейчас. Да. Ну да, не только технической работой, ну то есть программированием, но и продвижением. Ну, я не засекаю, честно говоря. Ну, в принципе, смотрите, я занимаюсь не только технической, не только программированием, но и как бы политическим продвижением данного сайта. Вот. И это занимает тоже очень много времени.
How is it funded?
Он только на пожертвования пользователей.
You know, the science publishing companies are not very happy with it. Particularly Elsevier has been very unhappy and attempted to sue you. I mean, have you had to pay for lawyers and things, or what's happening from that side of things?
Так, ну здесь ничего не происходит, потому что я пока что полностью вообще игнорировала это судебное разбирательство. Вот и все. Да, я знаю, что я должна там $15 миллионов, но я их пока никак не платила.
But if you were to talk to them, what would you say to these publishing companies? Not about the legal side, but what about what their view is that you should pay for this knowledge? So what is your opinion on that? What would you say to them?
Им бы я ничего не сказала. Ну, сказала бы, сдавайтесь.
So there's an alternative approach to academic publishing where the authors will pay, so open access. So sometimes I've been asked to pay for articles that I've submitted to journals,
Do you think scientists should be paying to have their work published?
Ну, в принципе, я считаю, что никто не должен платить там ни за публикацию, ни за чтение научных статей. Ну, в целом, если рассматривать вот эту модель, где автор платит, ну, естественно, не из своего кармана, а из гранта, который он получает от фонда, это, конечно, меньшее зло, чем когда вот то, что сейчас есть. Ну, насчет того, что модель сформируется в науке в будущем, я не знаю, посмотрим. Может быть, вообще что-то другое будет, а может быть, вообще исчезнут научные статьи, и будет что-то вроде научных социальных сетей.
And what about yourself for the next few years? Where do you see your own work going? Are you, I know you've had trouble having to change servers and things for where Sci-Hub is hosted. Do you think it's going to continue to exist? Is it going to be safe?
Я надеюсь, что Sci-Hub будет полностью легализован, то есть проект вообще перестанут преследовать. Так, ну, в принципе, сейчас я поступила в аспирантуру по теме философия науки. А в целом, в будущем ну, я не забросила вот эту нейронауку, в целом я в будущем думаю, что, может быть, можно будет открыть какой-то институт научно-исследовательский, где заниматься всякими такими проектами.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye.
People have called Sci-Hub the Napster of science. It's a pretty Gen X reference, but I don't actually think it's the same. Yes, record companies cream huge amounts off revenue from buying music, so they're kind of analogous to science publishing houses, but piracy costs the artist. They have created that music, they have intellectual property rights. Scientists are not paid per journal sale. Scientists don't get royalties from journals. So downloading academic articles illegally makes little financial difference to the scientist. Now, just so I don't end up in a legal video again, I better say that I would not advise anyone to break the law, but I do believe it is unjust that science is not publicly available. In fact, when researching this video, I almost suffered a lethal irony overdose when an article about Sci-Hub in the journal Science was hidden behind a paywall. Luckily, I was able to access it. Aaron Swartz was another brilliant young hacker who was a co-founder of Reddit, involved in the creation of RSS, Markdown, and Creative Commons. We internet users owe him a huge debt. He also downloaded thousands of academic papers illegally from MIT's restricted archive. These were not classified documents. They were not state secrets like WikiLeaks. They were thousands of pages of knowledge which should have been in the public domain. He was caught. He was aggressively prosecuted by the federal government and charged with wire fraud, facing 35 years in prison and $1 million in fines. He hanged himself at the age of just 26. In the interest of avoiding an unconscious bias, I deliberately sought out the views of the publishing industry and their arguments against Sci-Hub. An Elsevier exec said, Sci-Hub has mysterious backers with unclear motives, trying to sound very conspiratorial. Yes, those evil people paying to make science publicly available. Quick, get QAnon on the case. These people must be stopped. A more reasonable complaint is that illegal downloads mean scientists cannot track data regarding their work, how many times it's accessed and so forth. But surely you can see that that is a problem created by the current model. If the papers were freely available on journal websites and didn't have to be accessed via a back door, you could see all the same analytics that I can see for this video, for example. The most compelling reason is that journals offer extra things in exchange for the money we pay. They have in-house fact-checkers, statisticians, editors, illustrators. Okay. So to point number one, let's take a look at Retraction Watch, a website which monitors retracted scientific papers. Just for COVID-19 alone, they have an ever-growing list of papers that were retracted after being exposed to public review. It would be easy for me to cherry-pick the worst journals and hold them up as examples. That would be like saying Hershey's demonstrates that all chocolate tastes like cardboard soaked in puddle water. So instead, let's choose the best chocolates there are, the Lindt Lindors of publishing, the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, the two biggest medical journals in the world. In just the last few months, both of these journals, with their crack teams of fact-checkers that cost so much money, have had to withdraw papers that were filled with glaring errors that many people on Twitter were able to spot easily. The Lancet, of course, ran the fraudulent and fabricated MMR and autism paper, the aftermath of which we're still dealing with 2 decades later, and which has directly harmed children through the anti-vax movement. And by the way, that was only retracted 12 years after it was published. Back on Retraction Watch, there is a top 10 most cited retracted article leaderboard. Number 1 is a large dietary study in the New England Journal of Medicine, and The Lancet occupies no less than 3 shameful spots on the list. People like Professor Darrell Francis and Dr. Elizabeth Bick routinely expose scientific fraud in published research, all of which is in mainstream reputable journals. They're not combing the Azerbaijani Journal of Incontinence, no offense to any Azerbaijani urogynecologists. But much more common than fraudulent research is research that's just crap. You only have to look at the video I made about COVID science to see a few examples. I wanted to concentrate in that video on challenging some of the trials that made worldwide headlines, but if I'd cast the net a bit wider, that video could have been hours long, and yet all of this hot trash got published in journals that are apparently offering so much value to the process. So I'm not sure quality control, fact-checking, and statistical analysis is really a credible defense. As for illustrations, all the team publications I've been involved with have prepared our own figures. And while a journal might adjust to a house style, the onus of creating data visualization still falls to the authors. So really you're left with editors, who do provide an important role in terms of summarizing work and commissioning articles. But then again, now we have a wealth of places to obtain all of that. I can find the views of leading scientists on new research on Twitter, on blogs, podcasts, or hey, even YouTube channels. These are the modern science editorials. The world has moved on from the old model. Why choose 2 or 3 anonymous peer reviewers when you can have dozens by opening the paper to public scrutiny? It would be nice if the press would keep their noses out until the revisions have been made, but yes, I realise I've just strayed into pie-in-the-sky dreamland. So what about some possible ways forward? An alternative model already exists called open access. This is where the article is available to anyone. Great. But it simply shifts the costs onto the authors. When I first saw the option asking if I wanted a study that I was submitting to be open access, of course I clicked yes. But then I was asked for £1,500. Now you might say that's not a huge expense for a research team with money in the bank. But just think what a barrier that erects for researchers doing important work in the developing world, or smaller independent groups. In fact, universities say that what they're now doing is paying for the open access fees and paying for the subscriptions because we're operating both systems at once. Yet more options exist, namely exclusively open access journals which operate with far lower profit margins or no profit margins. But scientists need to be willing to say, no, I'm not going to publish my paper in the Superflash International Journal of Anti-Important and publish it in this online-only open access journal. For a scientist starting their career and trying to build a name, that's not always an easy decision to take. Springer, another publishing house, has said open access threatens to undermine the whole publishing model. Good job, guys. I think you're getting it now. Elsevier have been dismissive of alternative options, saying, if you think information shouldn't cost anything, go to Wikipedia. An interesting counter-argument when you consider how paid encyclopedias have gone the way of Robert Maxwell and his son-in-law. Now, I've talked about preprints on here before. In my video about the poor quality of science research related to COVID, I was fairly neutral on preprint servers, and I still am. Criticizing Facebook for hosting misinformation has a basis. They're a multi-billion-dollar company with immense resources, but preprint servers are small operations who simply can't provide the same peer review system as journals. It's not really their fault that scientifically illiterate journalists and armchair epidemiologists uncritically believe everything they read. So are preprint servers potentially a way forward? Just one of the several dozen that I found, medRxiv, is a preprint server that's seen a 400% increase in submissions this year for obvious reasons. Now, during COVID, this has clearly had enormous and unforeseen consequences, but they represent an option that will free us of the tyranny of publishers. We don't even have to look that far for an even more basic option. Look at this very website. You're watching a video without having to pay for it due to advertisements, and if you have any respect for the scientific method, you will give it a thumbs up because views, likes, retweets, things like that, they're all crude metrics, but they can be built on. The internet is the ultimate review process. Twitter peer review has revealed so much more about new papers than conventional peer review. I'm obviously aware it's more complicated than that, and we'd need to have some structure. But if we can figure out ways to rate electronics and cars online, then why not science? Indeed, some of the preprint surfers already offer the ability to leave critiques. The changes required to make some of these things happen are big, immense maybe. If scientists weren't fearful for their livelihood, with their very employment hinging upon how many papers they publish, they would be less inclined to rush out half-assed crap. Scientists don't go into science to get rich. They love science. They want to contribute to their field and not have the dreaded publish or perish sword of Damocles looming over their heads. Publish or perish, as a paradigm, must perish. Maybe I can speak a little bit more freely than some because I've decided that a career in academia is not for me. I'm not going to be as reliant on the journals for my livelihood. Now that's not a knock on academia, it's a comment on me. I'm just not cut out for it. I don't think I'm smart enough. And I look at my friends who are in academia and they're the brightest in our ranks. But are they really fulfilling their potential by spending their lives fending off impending doom by constantly writing grant applications to stay afloat and jumping through hoops for journals rather than really pursuing some blue sky thinking? It's no wonder that people idolize Elon Musk, because his billions have funded some scientists to do things they want. Bold things like SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink. Meanwhile, Bill Gates is also putting his billions behind scientists, but they're tackling problems that disproportionately affect the developing world, and hence he's vilified. But hey, it's the end of the video. What the hell am I doing introducing a tangent at this point? The great scientists in history were able to have long careers following their curiosity. Fred Sanger achieved the rare feat of winning 2 Nobel Prizes, but in the 2 decades in between, he didn't really publish very much. He's gone down as one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, but today, he'd probably just have been sacked. Now luckily I get access to... But for the price of access to just my one article,